Well, welcome. Good evening. I'm Carrie White, your Zoom host for this week's events. Welcome to the big reveal night. Tonight's session will include the announcement of the 2022 Neustadt International Prize for Literature, as well as a conversation with Cynthia Leitich Smith, the 2021 NSK Prize for Children's Literature winner. Our prize announcer this evening is Kathy Neustadt, and our moderator for the conversation later is Heather Shotton. But before we turn things over to them and our master of all things Neustadt, R.C. Davis Undiano, I do want to just walk through some quick logistics to make sure that you've got the tips that you need in order to engage well in case this is your first time joining us for one of the events. Please engage with us throughout the Lit Fest. Please use the chat box to engage the panelists, the authors, and the other participants. Have that side conversation there in the chat box about the great works that you're hearing about this evening. Secondly, sorry, wrong button. You can take control of your own viewing options. So in the top portion of your screen, you will either have a view or a view options button that allows you to move things around. So if you'd rather see things in gallery view or speaker view, if you want to make this small, that is totally up to you. You can completely take control of that throughout the event. We are going to have some Q&A tonight with Cynthia. So as you are listening later and you think of questions that you would like to ask her, you can put those in the chat box. We would ask you to start those questions for her with the word question in all caps. That'll help our moderators see those and make sure that they get thrown to her and not out for just chit chat with everyone else. You can also use the chat box if you have a technical question. You can chat with me, Carrie White, or Richard Feinberg. We're both noted on your screen as host and co-host. So we'd be happy to help you if you want to chat privately with us. One of your Zoom tools is closed captioning. So you can turn this on to see a live auto transcription of the discussion if that would be helpful to you. We are recording this session. So we invite you to turn your cameras on to be part of the engaging conversation. But if you prefer not to have your image recorded, you can leave your camera off. This also means you will be able to come back and watch this later or share it with others who need to hear the announcement and participate in the discussion. So we will notify you when the recording is available online. It is the expectation of the Neustadt family and the University of Oklahoma that all participants of the Neustadt Lit Fest enjoy a welcoming and inclusive environment free from all forms of discrimination, harassment, and retaliation. So we thank you for engaging with us in a respectful manner of one another. And with that, I will turn things over to RC.
Thank you so much, Carrie. Good evening, everyone. I am RC Davis Indiano, the Executive Director of the World Literature Today organization. I'm so pleased that you could join us for this portion of the 2021 Neustadt Lit Fest. We're gathered here tonight to hear a very important announcement, the winner of the 2022 Neustadt International Prize for Literature. After that, we will hear a conversation I think we're all very excited about, where Dr. Heather Shotton is interviewing Cynthia Smith. The Neustadt International Prize is an international prize that for 50 years has been known around the world as one of the most prestigious prizes anywhere, what the New York Times has called the American Nobel. It is one of the few prizes in the world recognizing literary excellence from any country in any genre. The winner receives a check for $50,000, a silver feather, that's a work of art, and a certificate. And the work is celebrated at a Lit Fest ceremony at the University of Oklahoma, which will start happening again in person next year. To date, the winners and jurors for this prize have overlapped with Nobel Prize winners about 33 times. The stellar cast of writers making up this year's Neustadt jury, and who did an amazing job of deliberating and coming to conclusion today about the winner for next year. That jury is Jennifer Croft, Tarfia Faizullah, Hamid Ismailov, Fozia Karimi, Eleni Kefala, R.O. Kwan, Carlos Labe, Carlos Pintado, Matthew Shinoda, and Olga Zilberborg. Thank you so much, all of you jurors, for bringing your expertise, your vast knowledge, and dedication to your work on this jury. You did an amazing job. No other way to put it. To announce the winner tonight of the Neustadt International Prize for Literature, we have with us one of the Neustadt family who has made these programs possible for over 50 years. Thank you, Kathy Neustadt, for supporting so many programs to benefit the world of literature and OU students. We are deeply appreciative of everything that you do for the University of Oklahoma and its students. Kathy Neustadt lives in Denver and is a freelance field producer for ABC News. She has worked on productions for World News Tonight, Good Morning America, and Nightline. She is the chair of the Meisel Arts and Culture Board at the Denver Jewish Community Center and is proud to have endowed the annual Neustadt Jam Fest, which every fall in Denver features visiting artists, authors, musicians, and new films. She is also a trustee at the Rose Community Foundation in Denver. In 2015, Kathy was honored by the Meisel Center when she received its Cultural Achievement Award, the same year that she also received the Regents Alumni Award for service to OU. Kathy graduated from the University of Denver in Mass Communications and has two amazing grown children, Tess and Josh Hankin. Please welcome my good friend, Kathy Neustadt.
Thank you so much for that generous introduction, RC. And I'm so happy to announce the winner of the 27th Neustadt International Prize for Literature. The winner of the Neustadt Prize for 2022 is a Francophone writer who was born in 1946 in Dakar, Senegal. He is the author of many novels, plays, and essays. He was awarded the Senegalese Republic Grand Prize in 1990 for La Trembure de la Mémoire, as well as the Prix Tropiques for The Night in His Shadow. His Dumi Golo was the first novel to be translated from Wolof, the language of Senegal. Zimbabwe International Book Fair listed it as one of the 100 best African books of the 20th century. The writer I am referring to is none other than Boubacar Boris Diop, a Senegalese writer and the newest laureate of the Neustadt International Prize for Literature. He is an African writer of the highest stature and an inspired choice for this award. We in the Neustadt family and our friends at the University of Oklahoma are delighted by this amazing recognition of a deserving contemporary writer. Writer and translator Jennifer Croft nominated Mr. Diop for the Neustadt Prize. Croft herself won the Man Booker International Prize in 2018 for her translation from Polish of Nobel laureate Olga Tokarzuk's book, Flights. She will attend the Neustadt Lit Fest in fall of 2022 when Mr. Diop receives his award. Mr. Diop today commented to WLT's executive director, RC Davis Undiano, that he is delighted beyond words to win the prestigious Neustadt Prize, and he looks forward to his time on the OU campus, where he is going to work with and inspire so many OU students. WLT will announce the dates for the fall 2022 Neustadt Lit Fest in the next couple of months. Our sincere congratulations to Jennifer Croft and her nominee, whose birthday happens to be today, the 27th winner of the Neustadt International Prize for Literature, Boubacar Boris Diop.
Great. We did wish him happy birthday, though, and he got back and thanked us. We have a very distinguished scholar, writer, next, who's going to introduce Cynthia Smith and Heather Shotton in their conversation. President's Associate Presidential Professor Joshua B. Nelson, a citizen of the Cherokee Nation and a native Oklahoman, is an associate professor of English and affiliated faculty with Film and Media Studies, Native American Studies, and Women and Gender Studies focusing on American Indian literature and film. Dr. Nelson?
Thank you, RC, and thanks for having me. Thank you all for coming, and especially thanks to Cynthia Leitich Smith for taking time to join us virtually here. So let me introduce our conversationalists. Cynthia Leitich Smith is the 2021 Neustadt laureate and a New York Times bestselling author of books for young readers, including Unbroken, which won the American Indian Library Association's Youth Literature Award. Her 2021 releases are the middle grade anthology Ancestor Approved, Intertribal Stories for Kids, and the novel Sisters of the Never Sea. I'd encourage you, when you get the chance, to go check out CynthiaLeitich.com and just generally be amazed at all that she has written and accomplished. And by the way, would just note that there are some fantastic material in there for the Halloween season. She is the author and curator of Heartdrum, a native-focused imprint at HarperCollins Children's Books, and she serves as the Catherine Patterson Inaugural Endowed Chair on the faculty of the MFA program in Writing for Children and Young Adults at Vermont College of Fine Arts. Cynthia holds a bachelor's degree in journalism from the University of Kansas, Lawrence, and a JD from the University of Michigan Law School in Ann Arbor. I'd like to know if there's anything that you haven't done. Let's see. So she studied law too at the Paris Sorbonne University abroad. She is a citizen of the Muscogee Nation and lives in Austin, Texas. So Hishji, welcome. Thanks for coming. Let me also introduce Dr. Heather Shotton, Wichita, Kiowa, and Cheyenne, and a good friend of mine. She's associate professor and chair of the Department of Educational Leadership and Policy Studies and the director of Indigenous Education Initiatives at the Janine Rainbow College of Education here at OU. Dr. Shotton's scholarship engages with Indigenous higher education, Indigenous college students, and Indigenous feminisms in academia. Her scholarship and practice have been dedicated to bringing visibility to Indigenous people and issues in higher education and transforming higher education as a site of reclamation for Indigenous communities. She served as a co-editor for 3 critical books that address Indigenous higher ed: Beyond the Asterisk, I think that's close to right, Understanding Native Students in Higher Education, Reclaiming Indigenous Research in Higher Education, and thirdly, Beyond Access, Indigenizing Programs for Native American Student Success. She's a strong advocate for Indigenous education and has spent her career advocating for Indigenous students and communities in educational systems. And there is no end of Native students here on campus who would tell you the very same thing. And I'm happy to testify to that as well. You've heard enough from me. Let's hear from interesting people. So we'll turn it over to you, Cynthia and Heather.
Thank you, Joshua. That was a very generous introduction. And I am so honored this evening to have the opportunity to engage in conversation and dialogue with Cynthia Leitich Smith about the amazing work that she is doing. I've been enthralled in all of her books and the work that she's engaging with over the last several months, and am deeply honored to engage. And so thank you, Cynthia, for allowing me the opportunity to sit with you tonight and talk about the good work that you're doing. So we want to begin by asking you to share with us a few words from Hearts Unbroken before we begin our conversation.
Mado, my friends, it's a tremendous honor to be here in conversation with you. I was thinking about Hearts Unbroken. It's a novel for young adult readers, and it's very much a conversation about the role that different kinds of speech play in our world. Artistic speech, political speech, religious speech, interpersonal speech. And so with that in mind, I'm going to give you just a little bit of a hint of Lou's voice, so I don't spoil too much of the novel, but you get the sense of the first person teen voice. Based on informal chatter and a dozen or so Hive interviews, my sense was that well over half of the student body either supported Mrs. Q's vision for The Wizard of Oz or didn't care one way or the other. The students of color I'd spoken with tended to be the more enthusiastic. The Monica Sharef said that maybe it all happened too fast. And Gabrielle said that talking about it all the time just stirs up trouble. I wanted an on-the-record statement from at least one elected student representative. Having struck out on the school bus with Stu co-VP Tanner Perkins, I asked Alexis if she could help me score a quote from Isaac, who'd beaten out Karishma. Sorry, Alexis told me in the newsroom later that week. I tried, but this semester Isaac's been willing to give me one lousy quote on how, gasp, homecoming is a proud tradition. That's it. I told him I could get his message out to the student body, but he said, why bother? I'm already the president. All colleges care about is that you run and win. So, really we have an engaging daily life perspective of a young Native teen journalist working in the newsroom, trying to gather together stories of interest to her peers. The most important of these is coverage of a controversy over the diverse and inclusive casting of the High School musical, The Wizard of Oz. In this excerpt, we see that they're struggling somewhat to get anyone with a voice of authority to go on the record and offer a real opinion in support or not of the new theater teachers' efforts to make theater a more welcoming place for all student actors.
Thank you for sharing those beautiful words, Cynthia. I think that leads us into our conversation. Well, one, I am a self-professed young adult junkie, absolutely. So it's a wonderful space with a 15-year-old daughter that we can often engage in conversations around books and what we're reading, and it's just you write so beautifully in this work. And you really address a number of issues, what you highlighted in this passage and throughout this work, issues such as identity, identity for Indigenous youth, representation, racism, social justice, and really seek to unsettle how we understand all of these complex issues. And you really beautifully captured the complexity of identity for Indigenous youth, the way that you talk about Lou and her understanding of herself, her growth, issues of being away from your homelands, of returning to home, how we understand home and ourselves in connection to community, and really the spectrum of identity for Indigenous youth that disrupts really kind of monolithic views of what it means to be an Indigenous person. And particularly for Lou, a Muscogee Creek person. So why is it for you this type of representation, the kind of representation that disrupts those monolithic views of who Indigenous people are and what Indigenous identity is? Why is that important, particularly in young adult literature?
The teen years are a time at which young readers are very much trying to come to terms with their own identity in all of its multifaceted wonder. So, when you think about an Indigenous narrative, and perhaps the passage accomplished that, oftentimes, if I said this is a story of a Native teen girl, you might imagine a girl with flowing black Malibu Pocahontas hair, raising her hand up to gesture to an eagle flying overhead. And I wanted to shake that up a little bit. I put you very much in the middle of a busy newsroom, that we have instead a young character who is in the throes, on deadline, in a somewhat chaotic mode as she is trying to assemble facts. She is trying to pin folks down and have something solid that she can go out into the world and relate to her own readers. So that is part of it, to bust out some of these default stereotypes, be they benevolent or horrific. The new age ghostly mentor is in some ways as damaging as the boogeymen on the prairie, because in each case, they flatten humanity. And what we need most of all is to convey that three-dimensionality. It's often easier to talk about pending issues. about land and water rights, which are so important, about mascots and the damaging imagery associated with them. But if we don't first care about Native people as human beings, none of that is going to resonate. Likewise, for young Native readers, if they don't see themselves represented as human beings, they won't feel respected or invited into the circle of literature. And that lack of welcome may result in them pulling back from learning in a myriad of forms, which is damaging to them, their families, and communities. So what we're really going for is a sense of the 21st century of kids who are of the now, nevertheless grounded in who they are and where they came from, and looking forward to an Indigenous future.
I love that, the notion of an Indigenous future, right? That helps us to see ourselves truly reflected in all of our hope and complexity and humanity. I think that's amazing. We definitely see a lot of parallels here as you address issues of social justice, of racism, the way that you're really unpacking different forms of racism, how both Lou and Huey, her brother, are encountering different forms of racism and how they're responding to it. We can think about the parallels that we see with PART, the Parents Against Revisionist Theory or Theater, and current issues that we're facing in a lot of states, even in our state, home state of Oklahoma, around that impact our schools, like bans on CRT. So these are not new issues, definitely, but we see a lot of parallels here and how this impacts our children in our schools. And so the struggles that both Lou and Huey face in confronting different forms of racism, I think, speaks so loudly to how we understand and really complicate these experiences. And previously, I was reading a post from Debbie Reese from American Indian in Children's Literature, one of her blog posts about your book when it first came out, and talking about that struggle and the way that she speaks to how she read this as an Indigenous parent. And so I'm going to read here a bit from her blog post and borrow from her, because this really resonated. So in this piece around the Wizard of Oz and Huey's struggle with learning about the racist origins of the Wizard of Oz, and coming to know Baum as an author and really his racist past and what that meant for him in this play, and the decision that he makes then to stand in solidarity with his castmates in all of the struggle. And so she writes, in Hearts Unbroken, Lou's brother Huey is in a tough spot when he learns about Baum. Does he stay in the play, be the Tin Man, thereby standing in solidarity with other castmates against the racist townspeople who think Native and students of color ought not be playing those white ones? I had such a lump in my throat as I read through those parts, and my heart swelled with Huey's decision. And I think Smith did all of that with such care. Lou and Huey's parents knew about Baum, but they let Huey learn about it on his own. They were there to support him once it became known to him, but they let him sort through it. My heart clenched thinking about all of the Native parents all across the country who make these kind of decisions all of the time. Bring it up or not. Like Lou's struggle with her identity, speak up or not. And so I think about the real life struggles that many Indigenous parents face, that Indigenous educators face, that our Indigenous students face as they encounter racism in different forms, and how they grapple with how to address this. And so you really work to unsettle how we think about, how we understand and confront racism. So I'm wondering if you might talk to us about your thinking here and the way that you really invite us to, as readers, to walk away from this book still reflecting, still contemplating, and reconsidering racism in all of its forms.
Certainly. For those who have not yet had a chance to read the novel, essentially, Huey is Louise, the protagonist's little brother. He is a young actor in his high school theater community, and he is wrestling with two competing concerns. On one hand, the new theater teacher has decided to shake things up and open up roles that were traditionally not written for young actors of color. He was cast as a Tin Man in the Wizard of Oz musical at his high school. It's very exciting. He's invested in supporting his fellow BIPOC students who managed to gain roles themselves. In that case, it's really about the theater teacher trying to widen the spotlight to give room for more kids to shine. And so he has a loyalty to that. At the same time, he was asked to research a bit about the history of the Wizard of Oz book, how it led to the stage play, and in doing so, looked into L. Frank Baum's past. Baum was a writer of fiction, but he was also a newspaper editor. And in that role, he advocated very explicitly for the genocide of Native people. Obviously, that's extremely upsetting to Huey as a Native person, but it becomes more contemporary to him, more immediate, when his theater teacher tells him that it's not important, that Baum was simply a man of his time, that everybody back then thought that way, when of course we know that the Native people back then certainly didn't think that way. So Huey has a difficult choice. Shall he go forward and perform with his friends and fulfill his theater teacher's vision of inclusion, or should he back away because his strong feelings in response to Baum's history and advocacy of genocide have impacted his ability to play the role effectively, and also his personal connection to it in a way that is diminishing and potentially even damaging to him on a deeper psychological level? There isn't an easy answer to that question. When we're looking at the art versus the art, the speaker versus speech, a racist versus something that they've created that may not be as steeped in that belief system, how each of us responds is going to be determined by our individual conscience, our proximity, competing concerns, and where we are in our own lives, on our own personal growth journeys. Ultimately, Huey decides to step back, but to cheer his friends on and support them for what they're trying to do. And they likewise come to a heightened awareness of his perspective. So there's a lot to unpack here. There aren't easy answers. There's a lot of gray in between. And Huey, through this process, is encountering historic racism. Meanwhile, due to objections from those who dispute the importance of inclusive casting, he's being targeted with both micro and macro aggressions in his community. He's facing racism in real time. So how do we convey that as an author? When we're looking at the plot, we're thinking about the human condition. We're thinking about how all of us are members of this larger society. We're all impacted by it. We all have work that we can do. That's most clearly manifested in his sister's journey. She herself encounters some negative experiences, again, micro, macro aggressions associated with being Native. But at the same time, she, in a moment of identifiable adolescent awkwardness, babbles out words that she too comes to regret because they are hurtful and draw on bigotry that she has absorbed as a member of the society, and must reassess her own culpability in these dynamics and find a way to rebuild and create a better future for her relationships, her interpersonal relationships, where she too is more sensitive. So when we're thinking about a young adult novel and working with young readers, I think it's important to be honest with them about the challenges that we all face, but also about our own roles in various dynamics. There is perhaps an unsettling quality to that. We would all like to think that the other, the big bad, is causing negative tensions in our society, is causing harm. But there is some benefit, some hope in the idea that we too have varying degrees of culpability, be it, you know, associated with race or preconceptions associated with other qualities like socioeconomics or region or body type or disability or any other identity element, is that because we are part of the problem, we can also all be part of the solution. None of us are helpless victims, and none of us can stand aside and say the problem belongs to someone else.
I absolutely, and right, every piece of that, and how we understand, we walk away from, particularly from this book, and the way that you've complicated that for us, unsettled how we understand, and particularly for Indigenous youth, how they encounter racism in a very specific way, I think is so critical. So, you know, as I was reading Hearts Unbroken, and then I later shared it with my 15-year-old. In fact, I was looking for it tonight because I had some pages marked and I can't find it because she has taken it from me and will never return it. So, but I think that speaks to really how critical this kind of work is, right? And so I really found myself reflecting on the books that were available to me at her age. And earlier we were talking about, as we were getting ready for this, and in the kind of pre-set up different authors and those that, how that's grown, the representation has grown. And so I was thinking about at that age, 15-year-old Heather, the books that were, or more so that weren't available to me, where I could see myself reflected, and how much, you know, I starved for is something where I saw myself reflected in the pages of the books, and in the cover and the illustrations, and in authors. You mentioned Tim Tingle earlier, and my older daughter, who's 20, was, you know, introduced to him. That was really kind of some of her first introductions to Indigenous young adult authors and storytellers. And so as my daughters have grown up, there's really been a marked shift in representation of Indigenous people in books, in characters, in storylines, and authors and illustrators. And so I want to shift to your work with Heartdrum imprint at HarperCollins, and the work that you've really been engaging with, and the incredible progress in terms of representation of Indigenous people and indigenizing the publishing process. And so can you talk to us a little bit about that endeavor, what your inspiration was for this particular work? And yeah, so maybe if you could share a little bit of that with us.
Certainly. First, I must give all credit for the original idea to Ellen O, a co-founder of the We Need Diverse Books nonprofit organization. She came to me and suggested launching a Native-focused book imprint at a major publisher. This was over breakfast. We were two friends catching up, and I agreed with her that this was such a terrific idea. It would be wonderful if something like that happened. And she said, and you can be the author curator. And I said, oh no, I am not famous or fancy enough to take on such a significant undertaking. I don't have the skill set. And then she proceeded to tell me that I shouldn't be talking myself out of my potential, and that she would let me think about it and check back in every once in a while to perhaps nudge. I'm blessed with the opportunity to be a writing teacher. I teach at Vermont College of Fine Arts and in our MFA program in writing for children and young adults, and in workshops across the country. I've taught abroad at the Asian Festival of Children's Books in Singapore. And I love those experiences. You're in a bit of a creative cocoon with writers. And the particular workshop that I'm thinking of took place a few months after I talked to Ellen. It was an all Indigenous writers workshop. And I was awestruck by the talent, by the warmth, by the laughter of the writers as they gathered in community and supported and celebrated one another. One of the most striking features was that it wasn't like a lot of other gatherings of aspiring literary artists. The main focus wasn't on getting published. It wasn't on what will you do if you ever make it big, or it was on Native children. It was on honoring and drawing on the wisdom of elders who had a long history in education, who had led the way and made room for the conversation of books for young readers, for more voices like ours to come in. It was a gathering that was about love and joy and celebration, and so contrary to much of the default imagery about Indigenous people, so rooted in a desire to lift up our kids and to build bridges for them between their lives, their families, and those of their peers, to help remove some of the roadblocks that we had encountered due to stereotypes by offering corrective narratives that would give them opportunities to form genuine friendships and be their whole selves in ways that would make them feel empowered and comfortable moving through the world on behalf of themselves, their goals, and their communities more broadly. So that experience, and I sometimes I can close my eyes and I can still hear us laughing together, is what really made me decide to move forward. It was a reminder that it doesn't matter if I'm not famous or fancy, because none of it is about me. All of it is about we, and we go together to lift each other up and to make room for those who are to come, while honoring those who gave us the opportunity to do so.
That's amazing. I think you and I spoke earlier when we previously met about Indigenous humor, right? Something that we really talked about was the rise in Indigenous humor, really in mainstream America. And so I want to touch on that because you spoke really passionately about the laughter that happened in this first gathering, and what was distinctive about that, and that truly the medicine of laughter and joy. America was introduced in a new way to Indigenous humor earlier this year with Reservation Dogs, and it's and the series, right? So as America was introduced to terms like Scodin and Studis and all of the nuances of not just Indigenous humor, but Oklahoma Indigenous humor, many of us saw ourselves for the first time truly reflected, and our, not just ourselves, but our family members, right? We all identified with Willie Jack, and there's someone that we all know, a Willie Jack, or we ourselves are a Willie Jack. I myself have bonded with colleagues who are not Indigenous over Reservation Dogs, and had a number of conversations. We've also witnessed a rise in Indigenous humor in books. And you really kind of spoke to this earlier about honoring the humanity of Indigenous people, right? That we're not flat, that we're complex. You just spoke to understanding our whole selves and being represented as our whole selves. And so what are your reflections about highlighting Indigenous joy and Indigenous humor in literature, particularly in young adult literature?
It's a tremendous priority. It's been interesting for me because when I've talked to advisors in the industry who are genuinely trying to help and are suggesting narratives that might appeal to me, they tend to default to tragedy, because that, to the extent we're represented in the curriculum at all, is often what it is. And so when I am working with my mentees, when I'm on that other side now, you know, if you stick around long enough, suddenly people stop talking to you and they start asking you things. Although you should always keep listening, because that is where all the wisdom comes from. I remember I was talking to Dawn Quigley. She's a Turtle Mountain Band Ojibwe writer, and she is the author of the JoJo McCoon's chapter book series. It's not YA, it is younger. It's a comedy about this spunky little Ojibwe girl who is navigating very relatable universal struggles at school as she tries to make friends, as she tries to decipher the mainstream worldview that is in conflict with her particularly Ojibwe way of looking at things, and does so sort of good-naturedly, unapologetically, and just moving on. That is such a gift. And when I was talking to Dawn, you know, as someone who had taught with her at workshop, the thing that I said is, you are one of the funniest people I know. Let's see that on the page. And we're not holding everybody's hand. We're not spelling out the jokes. We're not flattening it all. There is some tribal language included. And, you know, she says very specifically, if a young child can say Tyrannosaurus Rex, then they can pronounce these Ojibwe words too, just fine. You know, give them some credit. And I think that that's something that Reservation Dogs, you know, with the humor that you were talking about, does too. I remember watching the first episode and thinking, oh, we're not pulling any punches here. There are no footnotes. We're just going to let it roll. And that means that not everyone will get every joke, and that's okay. Mm-hmm. I think the way we understand each other is by continued exposure with an open heart and mind. And the better we get to know each other, the easier it is for us to find those moments of connection, those moments where we genuinely are laughing together. And if that is a place that we can bring children and teenagers, Native and non-Indian, then that's going to result in a better future for all of those kids, but for those Indigenous kids in particular, because they will be seen as people first, and they will be associated with more positive mental defaults in the society.
Absolutely.
Heather,
yes.
You asked me to give you time cues at 7:45.
Thank you, RC. Just a couple more questions, Cynthia, and then we can get to Q&A from our audience and those who are joining us. But I want to say I love every bit of that, and just so appreciate the way you spoke to the important role of humor, right? You can't talk about Indigenous populations, Indigenous people without humor. It's so much a part of who we are, our stories, our communities, our lessons, and really understanding not just, you know, our humanity, but understanding every piece of us, our, you know, all of our whole, as you said, our whole selves, and the complexity of who we are, and really celebrating Indigenous joy, right? And moving away from this constant narrative of tragedies, because there is.
When we're talking about, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
When we're talking about some of the challenges that Native teens encounter on a day-to-day basis, and if you look at Louise, you know, she has a typical fall for a kid, an autumn semester. She sees models on television who are wearing headdresses, and she notices it in a way that maybe her other classmates don't. She is aware of people in the greater Kansas City area who are defaulting to sports mascot imagery to cheer on their team. And she sees it in a way that not everyone else might. She is giving away candy on Halloween. And yes, the little children are so very cute, but maybe another choice would have been better. If you have a character who can cope with all that with a hint of humor, perhaps resigned humor, or perhaps even humor tinged with a bit of cynicism or sadness at the teen level. It one gives the Native young readers a coping mechanism, but it also allows the non-Native readers to see through her eyes, to develop empathy, and to say, you know, this is something that is a cumulative effect. This is hitting this person differently than it might me, and by walking vicariously through their life, I understand better now. If we can have that understanding with a hint of humor, that means we have empathy with the highest degree of the meeting of the minds. And that is a window for progress.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. And so just a couple more questions. As we think about representation, I wonder if you might help us all to think about areas where we're still missing representation. We've struggled so long just for Indigenous representation in general, to see ourselves. And so we've talked about a lot of complex issues, and you even approach this in a lot of both your work and the work with Heartdrum imprint. So what are areas that are still missing in terms of Indigenous representation and all of its complexity?
Oh, there's so much. There's so much. I'm particularly interested in near history, histories of the 20th century. We didn't all disappear in 1900, and a lot happened between them and now. And that's an area that we're trying to address at the Heartdrum imprint by publishing a limited amount of nonfiction set in the 20th century. We're looking for higher quality, older historicals that have a more accurate, authentic representation of events as they unfolded, and going past or going beyond the idea that Native people didn't exist before they began conversations with non-Native people, right? Our history goes back thousands of years, and there is so much untapped opportunity for dialogue and story, some of which we have suppressed. Meanwhile, just looking at current day, which is my focus really in my work, there's so much tremendous diversity in Indian country. There's tribal diversity. There's, the situation is different for urban Native folks versus those living in their tribal communities. Hearts Unbroken, I intentionally wrote about a middle-class, Midwestern, suburban Native child. And part of that was to send the message that Native kids are everywhere. When I hear teachers say that Native kids aren't in their classrooms, I am pretty sure that they are wrong. I am pretty sure there are tribal members or recent descendants who are in there, and we want them to feel good about that part of themselves, very often because schools are not safe places for Native people sometimes. I'm from a boarding schools family. We've all seen recently a video that shows some of the ways that Native children are made to feel othered in school systems. They can fly under the radar. You may assume that they are non-Indigenous Latinos or Black kids or white kids because you're thinking, oh, they went extinct, when no, there's actually one of those children sitting right there in front of you. So that's something for those educators in the audience to always be aware of. But in terms of representation, those groups too, Black Native people are a group that is underrepresented in the body of literature. Non-binary and two-spirit folks, certainly. Native people for whom Spanish is their first language. I could go on and on, but kids who are from families that have multi-tribal influences, maybe their parents or grandparents are from different tribes, and then there's just the individual level. If you look at me and my cousin Elizabeth, who my character cousin Elizabeth from Jingle Dancer is based on, yes, we have a lot in common. We're literally from the same family. But I'm more of a book person, and she's more of a film person, and she is a gardener. And I saw Star Wars over 300 times, paid admission in the theater. My geek cred is strong. So, when you're talking about diversity, it's in all of us, and it's also across those communities. And that's why there are so many stories to be told. Rich, exciting, resonant, page-turning, entertaining, and informational stories.
Wonderful. I love it. Yes. I think we're at about the time. Are we ready to move into questions from the audience?
Just to let you know, we are at 7:50.
Okay, let's go ahead and move in. I have one final question, but I'm going to save it for the end. And right now we're going to move into our Q&A from the audience that we have here. And so from Dr. Nelson here, we have a question. He says, I haven't had the chance to read from your Tantalize series, but with my mind on Halloween, I'm intrigued. And I wonder if you're writing back to the Twilight series with these young adult novels about werewolves and vampires.
I have been accused of doing so. So a little bit of background. Tantalize is a series in conversation with Abraham Stoker's Dracula. Each book goes closer to the source material, and the modern hook was to center book one on Quincy with an I.E. Morris, the Texan whose Bowie knife did the count in Stoker's original novel. And so it's updated, it's gender flipped, and it tackles a variety of themes that were in Dracula that are still pertinent in present day. Everything ranging from the dark other, which back then meant Eastern Europeans, and immigration and how scary that was apparently in London at the time. I don't know. As well as gender empowerment. Mia was a very modern woman of her time. She could use that newfangled typewriter. And I will say that is a superpower and remains so today. So it was a way to update all of that. The first book in the Tantalize series actually sold before Twilight came out. So it was not a direct response to Stephanie Meyer's work, although it is often remarked upon for its strong girl characters and the fact that representation was handled quite differently. I do have Indigenous secondary characters, particularly in the Feral Trilogy spinoff, and I was very careful to ensure that they were human beings and not mystical others, in part because of a history of Native people being portrayed as animalistic or savage. And so it was a way to push back against that, and at the same time, through the veil of metaphor, convey some of the societal issues we're wrestling with in a way that might be more identifiable to young readers. It gave them some space to process without feeling so right there in today's controversies.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful. We have another question here. Your own first 3 books are now available from Heartdrum. How was the experience of revisiting those books for these new editions?
Oh my goodness. It was a reckoning with my younger writer self to a certain extent. I'll talk a little bit about this tomorrow in the keynote, but the new editions have updated back matter. The author's notes were actually a fairly significant shift. When I was a new writer, I was very young at a time that publishers weren't taking chances on new voices. And so I was very concerned with seeming serious and impressing the grown-ups in a certain way, and how I framed my author's notes. And all of that is just fallen away. I mean, don't get me wrong, grown-ups, I love you and you matter, but I work for children and teenagers. They are my primary audience, and I write for them. And so those notes became really love letters in a way, in that big sisterly kind of way, that were meant to be a bridge for them between the narrative and going back to their day-to-day lives. With Jingle Dancer and Indian Shoes, the tweaks were more minor, I think because they featured younger children, and younger kids weren't, at least in those narratives, as enmeshed in technology as teenagers are. But oh, the tech has changed. There were no cell phones, and Rain is not my Indian name. Mm-hmm. And it is a different world now. So I had to rethink, an answering machine is a significant device of revelation in the original book. That's not going to entirely ring true, even if you go to grandpa's house. So I had to really stop and reconsider. There were also moments where I felt like the connective tissue for kids wasn't strong enough. Initially, Rain was marketed as a tween novel for 10 to 14-year-olds or middle school students. And that category, even though it should exist, it should be robust, has never really taken off, the young YA. And I think it's because, you know, libraries and schools and bookstores have a children's section and a teen section. There really isn't that tween section. I wish there were. It is its own developmental stage. It deserves its own books that speak to it. So when we were first writing it, I was imagining 10 to 14-year-olds reading it. Now I realize that it would be 12 and up, except because it is so much shorter, which is the fashion, then it's going to attract younger readers. And I need to be mindful of all of those audiences as I frame the content.
I wonder if you might talk to us a little bit about building off of this, the work with Heartdrum. If you might talk to us a little bit about the production side and your focus on indigenizing the publishing process and what that's been for you.
It's been an education. As an author, I had certain misconceptions about how publishing works. We started out with a modest goal. We were looking to have a small list of 4 to 6 books, maybe a year. We are through our first year. We have signed 26 books. So when you're thinking, you know, maybe 43 books total published in the United States featuring Indigenous voices, that is a percentage game changer. We may break that 2% representation mark of all Native books within the larger body of literature. And I am looking for that 2%. It better be worried. So that required a lot of thought. Something that I didn't realize when I was an author is that we think about our manuscripts and we worry about doing our best work for kids who are such a critical audience, the audience of our hearts. And so when we send a manuscript in to an editor, publisher for consideration, we're worried about whether or not it's good enough. And there is absolutely a quality threshold, of course. At the same time, each publishing line has its own voice and personality. So at Heartdrum, we're very focused on contemporary fictional stories that are centered on young Native heroes and their communities. A book that is set in the distant past, it could be excellent, but it's probably not a fit for us. We are doing one picture book biography, but we're probably not going to be doing many of them because our focus isn't nonfiction. There are considerations that are about, I hate the word branding, but conveying to the readership the kind of book that they can expect from us. We're also really interested, and part of this is my passion, in intergenerational stories. I'm very concerned about the underrepresentation of authentic, accurate, and respectful depictions of elders in children's literature. Our largest generation is between 57 and 75, and I'll talk a bit more about that, but I think that when we're considering young people and their relationship to the generations that have come before them, that's a dynamic that we have to take into more serious consideration, especially when you're talking about communities wherein elders are historically and still today more valued. So there are a myriad of concerns. I am certainly thinking all the time, well, you know, I want to make sure we have stories that are set on the res. I want to make sure that we have stories that are reflective across socioeconomic class. There is a constant search for the right illustrator to fit that picture book manuscript. And again, an illustrator could be absolutely wonderful. Their work could be exquisite. But if it is a now, wow, popping kind of story for kids, we're going to need to have a more colorful graphic approach to it. So I'm learning a lot about that kind of thing. We're also erring on the side of more and not less back matter, and I'm helping to nurture authors through that process because there are so few books published And we know that these are books that are going to be used in the classroom, in curriculum, perhaps by teachers who have been miseducated themselves but are trying to do better. We want to give them all the tools that we can to facilitate that. So back matter, author's notes, any kind of supplemental information is a bigger priority than it might be otherwise if our focus was different. And we also worked with a wonderful author, Lakota educator, Andrew Page, who did a beautiful job of putting together educator guides that we could send out, and teachers could then use those books with confidence. You know, a lot of times I think you'll have really well-intentioned teachers who are wanting to be proactive and responsible ambassadors, but they don't have the background themselves to do that. So we're trying to provide bridge work to do it. All of those things come into play. We're working with Native voice actors on the audiobooks. That's a lot of fun. And it's an opportunity, you know, for more people to get involved in various places along the publishing chain. I know HarperCollins recently hired a copy editor who is Native, and that is really exciting to have someone in-house in a role like that. So, you know, it's going to take time to make larger systemic shifts, but the existence of a Native focused imprint at a major publisher, which has been embraced by educators, by independent booksellers in particular, have been tremendous advocates, by young readers, has encouraged more literary agents to be open to Native voices and visions. I believe that other publishers are saying to themselves, look, they're proving there is a market for these books, and maybe we should be part of that conversation too. So, you know, every drop in the bucket matters, and we're hoping to do what we can to fill up our share.
I think that it's so enlightening to think about every aspect of the publishing process, and how exciting it is to have an Indigenous copy editor. That's an important step. I don't know if you want to add any more. We have a question. Someone asked if you could speak to how cover illustrators are brought into the process, and how you work with that.
Again, we're working with Indigenous illustrators. We are very mindful of making sure the art respectfully and accurately reflects the book. So I have had experiences in the industry where friends have come to me with cover art, in fact, even with interior picture book art that they didn't see along the way. And it's not so much an opportunity for them to comment, but more of, here it is, we hope you like it. Whereas we're very conscientious about bringing in writers who are drawing on lived experience and their own cultural knowledge to craft their stories so that they can see the sketches, so they can see color proofs, so that they're included at each stage along the way. And if we need to, so that they can consult with experts who can speak to subjects that appear on the page. And that helps us to ensure that the work is authentic, accurate, respectful, and also that the author really likes it too. You know, the illustrator is bringing half of the equation for a picture book. The author is bringing the other half. For the cover art, that's still significant. Let me show you. This cover for Ancestor Approved is by Nicole Neidhart. She's Navajo. And this girl on the cover represents a character from Kim Rogers' short story. Kim is a Wichita writer. She's absolutely brilliant, up and coming new voice. And this was an opportunity for her to get that foothold. We have signed her up for 3 more books. We're so excited. And, you know, the butterflies that appear here on the shawl of the dancer are reflective of Kim's own personal predispositions, her love of that imagery. There was a communication that helped to facilitate this. Another sort of different way of going about it, but just as effective, I requested for Sisters of the Never Sea that Floyd Cooper, who, like me, is tribally enrolled with Muscogee Nation, would do the art for Sisters of the Never Sea. Floyd is was a Black and Muscogee writer. I'm so sad to say that we lost him this year. He's such a talent. And in that case, he was a well-established illustrator who had won numerous awards and had such talent and vision. And I just said, whatever he wants is good with me. You know, he was coming from a place where he was reflecting his own identity. He had grown up in Tulsa, the story is set in the Tulsa suburbs. He was able to reflect that. When I saw the sketches, the only thing I really asked for a closer look at was little Michael's face, the baby brother, so that I was sure that it evoked wonder, which is what I was really going for, is that emotion, that identifiable magic, and Floyd more than captured it. So, you know, if you think about it, we focus as writers, we focus so much on the words, but this art and this art is every bit as important as the words on the page. They're all telling the story to kids, and they deserve our utmost respect.
Yeah, absolutely. You talked a little bit about teachers' tools, and you spoke previously to your partnership and work with We Need Diverse Books. And as an educator who focuses so much on representation of Indigenous people, Indigenous youth, and students, I wonder if you might speak a bit to that work and the critical work of We Need Diverse Books and your partnership with them.
Certainly. We Need Diverse Books began as a hashtag that grew into a movement and became more formalized through a nonprofit organization. And We Need Diverse Books programming includes the Walter Awards to recognize outstanding diversity on the page. It includes internships in publishing to do more of that along the chain kind of representation we were talking about, to put new up and coming editorial marketing folks in those jobs and give them a chance to move forward. It includes grants for writers. There have been a number of emergency grants because of the pandemic and people struggling right now to ensure that they can sort of keep doing the important work that they're doing. There are mentorships. I'm working with a program. It's an annual program. It's funded by Harper Children's and Heartdrum to provide an annual writing workshop to Native American, Native Alaskan, Native Hawaiian writers and writer illustrators. And that has been tremendous. Many of our participants have gone on to place those books at various publishers, including our own. And it's so exciting because it provides a space where they can go deeper on craft, where they can talk about writing structures that may be unfamiliar to the mainstream and how to navigate those conversations artistically, professionally, and also just connect with one another as friends, as supporters, to know that they're not alone on that journey, that there is a community, an intertribal creative community that's really pulling for them and that they can turn to whenever they need support.
No, that's really wonderful. We have Heidi Torres. Hello, Heidi, a colleague here in the College of Education. And she says, we're an international and multicultural children's literature course here that are watching, and all in awe and deep appreciation of you, Cynthia. We read Hearts Unbroken, and thank you for your incredible work. And they want to know what you're working on next.
Oh my goodness. There are a couple of answers to that question. The first is my fall 2022 release. I have joined forces with National Book Award finalist Kekla Magoon. We're very excited about that. And the two of us are writing a middle grade graphic novel series. It's called The Blue Stars. It is about two cousins who are Muscogee and Black and living in a city neighborhood with their grandmother, and they are superheroes fighting for voting rights in their middle school and community. Essentially, Kekla and I are writing ourselves as 12-year-olds, and it's so much fun. It's essentially play on the page. It grew out of our running to my little blue Honda Fit and saying, "To the Bluebird." And so then we started thinking about what would it be like if we were 12-year-old superheroes, and now the world will find out. It will be illustrated by Molly Murakami. She is a debut illustrator. It was very important to us that we have the opportunity to work with someone who would be kind of an up and coming vision on the page and bring that perspective to it. So that's one that would be certainly a book that shows intersectional representation, Native representation coupled with other communities to show the fullness of children's world today. And then more personally, I am working on a book that is centered on Huey Wolf. He is, for those of you who read it, the little brother of Louise from Hearts Unbroken, and it's a ghost story.
I love it. I love Huey, by the way.
Thank you.
He's an amazing little brother character. Let's see, Christine has a question for you. So talking about mainstream and freedom of speech, including interpersonal speech that are present in a unique way in your books. And so with this in mind, can your books be viewed as a vehicle to denounce or to create awareness about silence as complicity and to inspire discussion about issues such as the struggles for youngsters to fit in today's performative society?
Yes, I mean, all of this is unpacked to varying degrees. One of the things that Huey struggles with is what to say, whether to say it, if he's obligated and he's not obligated, but if he wants to make an affirmative choice. So when I'm thinking about writing a book for teenagers, and especially one in which their take on it may be idiosyncratic, but still valid, I'm not necessarily looking to give them Cynthia Leitich's vision of the meaning of life. First of all, that may be a little flawed to start with. Second of all, I really want to give them things to think about. I want to give them questions to consider. And with speech, I intentionally showed a slipstream, from the awkward babble, which can be still very damaging, to really targeted hate speech that has horrific ramifications. There's so much space in between, and there's so much room for each of us to navigate that space. There was a question asked of me recently by a younger person who was saying that they sometimes felt pressured to be a cultural spokesperson. And that can be really draining. It's emotional labor. Having published a book, Hearts Unbroken, that touches on a lot of microaggressions, for a while I made the joke that in publishing a book about microaggressions, I have apparently invited several of them myself, because almost immediately reader after reader said, oh, but I've done that thing, and are you sure it's not okay? And can you talk to me about this? And I said, or you can read the book and sit with it and think about it, because it's far more reasoned and thoughtfully framed than I can give anyone off the cuff.
Yeah. Yes, the world of microaggressions at any age, right? So I want to conclude and wrap up. I don't see any more questions from our audience here, though I do see a comment from Dr. Torres in response to what's next for you. And she says, you should hear the excitement and squeal from the students in her class, and we can't wait. I am with you. I cannot wait for this graphic novel and thinking about 12-year-old Cynthia as a superhero. I think that's amazing. And so I'll end with this question this evening. As you were talking about the inspiration for Heartdrum and the work that you're engaging with, and you said it's about we, right? And thinking about the uplift. And so I want to ask you, what is your hope for Indigenous youth?
My hope is that they feel empowered, but never obligated to raise their voices, that they know that they're part of a chorus that's calling for Indigenous justice, for a brighter future, for the reclamation of land, that they can pick up any book and know that nothing in it is going to tell them that because they're Native, because they're Indian, because they're Native Alaskan or Hawaiian, that they're lesser than, that they know they always belong in the world of letters and come from a long tradition of storytelling that will just keep growing and becoming bigger and brighter with the passage of time.
Beautiful. Well, thank you, Cynthia, and thank you for your beautiful and critical work, and for helping so many of our Indigenous youth, for Indigenous authors to see themselves reflected, and for inspiring what will be generations to come of Indigenous authors and illustrators and publishers and copy editors. And so just thank you for the incredible work that you're doing, and for sharing time with us tonight, and all of your thoughts, and helping us to think and reflect. And I hope that we all walk away this evening continuing to reflect on your words and what you've shared with us. So thank you for this beautiful gift.
It's an honor to be in conversation with you. I am tremendously grateful.
Aho.
Before we're done, right, with the conversation now. Before we lose our audience, I just wanted to say a couple of things about tomorrow. First, I want to say thank you to Cynthia, Heather, and Kathy for just a really rich, wonderful evening. This could not have been better. Those who are attending the Lit Fest have probably noticed there's a pattern here. There are many moving parts in this Lit Fest, but as we've gone forward, the focus is more intently and solely on Cynthia. Tomorrow is the culmination of that day. At 11 o'clock will be Cynthia's keynote address. You really should not miss that. It's going to be wonderful. Tomorrow night at 7 o'clock, we will start the process of awarding the NSK Neustadt Prize for Children's and Adult Literature to Cynthia. You will hear from the poet laureate of the United States, Joy Harjo, will be there reflecting on the significance of Cynthia's winning this prize. President Joe Harris will talk about that as well. You'll hear from the 3 Neustadt benefactors that have made this evening possible, made so much possible in this program. Kathy Neustadt, Nancy Barcelo, and Susan Schwartz. So it's a big night, and then we will wrap up probably around 8 o'clock with Kim Weiser, David Shook, the international translator and poet, Daniel and Kathy Neustadt, and we will do some wrap-up comments. So it's a day very much focused on Cynthia, and don't miss it. It's going to be just an amazing day. Carrie, did you have some other comments?
I just wanted to give one more thank you to our jury who spent their day deliberating and came up with our awardee for 2022. And to all of you for being here, thank you so much. It's been a great evening. And again, my thanks added to Heather and Cynthia for a great conversation. Have a great night.
Good night, everyone. See you tomorrow. By the way, we can see you from up here. You think we can't, but we can. So see you tomorrow.